teachers or Reddit, what is your dealing with helicopter parents story?
Experience 1. I've had a horrible helicopter parent week, so this thread makes me feel like I'm in good company and am not alone. The power that these parents have in coming into the classroom and changing how things are done is scary. I had 3 kids who were caught turning in the same paper, and after giving them zeros for the assignment, they got their parents to form a witch hunt. One of the parents rallied all the other parents in the class, who all came in to hold a meeting about me and how I teach, even though none of them had been in my class or had talked with me personally. This is a highly advanced class, and the lowest grade is a C, which is really amazing. I'm actually super proud of all of them. Anyway, my parents got the administration to have me allow them to redo the paper, essentially showing that I have zero authority for grades or to uphold high standards, and I now must be extra evaluated because of the things these parents say I do in my class. Meanwhile, I still have to teach these kids and act as a professional toward them, which I will. This behavior is unacceptable as a parent. Experience 2. I had a student a few years ago whose mom would email all his teachers every single day wanting to know what we had done in class. We have websites with class calendars on them. It got so bad that the school eventually told her that she could only email once a week. Later that year, the student turned in a research paper, and the first paragraph had been stolen word for word from a website. I printed out the web page, gave the kid a 0, and wrote a referral for cheating. Hours later, the mom emailed me furious that I would accuse her son of cheating. I explained the situation, and she told me, oh, it wasn't his fault. He had been too busy to type it, so I did it for him. I wanted to spruce up the intro a little bit, so I added that little extra bit. I guess I forgot to add the source. Seems legit. Edit, fixed some grammar. Experience 3. I was working with a class of gifted high school students taking a summer course. During a field trip, one of my students needed to go to a doctor's appointment and would be picked up early by her parents. The only way to contact the group on the field trip was my cell phone, so the parents got my personal number. In the week left in the summer course, I received 23 text messages and 15 calls asking why their 10th grade daughter had not called them back. Experience 4. Freshman year of college, my roommate's mother was a helicopter mom. To an extreme. We weren't friends, just roommates, but I heard stories from multiple people. One morning around 7 a.m. I heard a pounding on the door. I pull my ass out of bed and open it only to see her mother standing there looking beyond furious. Apparently, she found out somehow that my roommate had been skipping one of her classes. She had driven 2 hours to show up at our door at 7 a.m. to scream at her 18-year-old daughter. She also yelled at me for a few minutes for not waking up my roommate / not telling her to go to class. I left pretty quickly and spent the rest of the day hiding out in my friends' dorm rooms. Experience 5. The 8th graders at my middle school used to take a trip to a theme park or something every year, but you weren't allowed to go if you were failing any of your classes. Well, some kid's mom called and whined that her kid couldn't go because he was failing, and it was discriminatory towards him and ended up getting the trip canceled for everyone. Edit, for those who say the school was being unfair for keeping someone back who was failing. The end of the year trip was the only field trip that they would keep kids home on for failing, and we knew up front that we were expected to do well to get to go. This kid just didn't give a crap about school. He skipped a lot, he was constantly in trouble for acting out, and in one class that I had with him we were getting ready to take a test and he said, "Screw this," tore it up and walked out. His mom should have been more focused on getting him help rather than ruining things for the kids who did try. Experience 6. I taught ESL to a bunch of high schoolers, many of whom were at an SAT level. There was this one kid who was incredibly fluent and would write wonderful essays in my class. However, his mother wasn't satisfied. She forced him to write a 10,000-word essay every single day. Now, she had never learned a foreign language, didn't speak English, and I don't think she even graduated from college. But she would, through her son and other translators, give me an earful on how I was being too easy on the students because I wasn't making them do 4 hours of homework a night. And this poor kid, this unfortunate, 14-year-old bastard who was fluent in 2 languages and was ready to take the SATs in a language not his own, ended up getting worse and worse at writing. He would repeat things again and again just to get the word count because his mother would check the essays every night. Well, she'd check the numbers. She wouldn't be able to read the paper. He would lie and make up stories, interjecting them at weird places. He did absolutely miserably in his exams because he wouldn't take my advice to stop writing when you've run out of things to say. Experience 7. I teach middle school English at a public school in Texas. I brought a mom in several months ago to discuss how her son had been plagiarizing, poorly, I might add. But she only wanted to talk about his acting career. She pulled out a leather-bound portfolio stuffed with acting/modeling photos of her little angel and talked to me for an hour about each one. Cut to this week. He turns in a paper about his strongest childhood memory. It's a 2-page summary of every famous person he's acted with and what movies I would know them from now. Looking at the writing style and level of detail, the mom clearly wrote the essay. WTF. Experience 8. I have a student's mother who emails me about once a week to try and scavenge extra information about what her son should write for his assignment. She's got the criteria sheet and the reading list, yet she's still never gotten above a B-. Because she's actually quite a crappy writer, it's nearly impossible to prove that it's her writing his assignments without one of them admitting it. But the whole staff room knows the truth. Uneasy face. Edit, yes, we do in-class essays. But I have to set independent research tasks as well, can't get around it, and obviously wouldn't want to, because they're the funniest part of history. Thanks for the suggestions though, guys. Experience 9. Had a student last year where his mother was always claiming he had some pretty serious health issue. While I hate calling people liars, she would make it obvious. The best example I can give is her claiming he had severe asthma. I made every accommodation I could for this kid, including every time he complained of chest pains, I would send him to the nurse immediately. I began to wonder when I would see him at recess running around like a maniac without any complaints. He only got chest pains during a test or whenever it was convenient for him. Never questioned it because I just didn't want to even try to argue. Another example is during science we were playing on microscopes, and he thought it would be okay to just run around the room. Of course, I kicked him out and told him he flunked science. Well, at the end of the day, I had a change of heart and made him read a chapter out of the science book and write a summary for homework. The next day he comes in with this elaborate 3D model of the chapter and his summary is written in pen and the writing looks like a grown woman's, not a 4th grade boy's. I ask him to tell me about the chapter and of course he can't, so I call his mom. She proceeds to tell me that he spent hours on this thing and she watched him do it. I call her out and explain he can't tell me anything. She admits she helped but feels there is nothing wrong with her writing for him or constructing the model. She was and still is psycho. She called me last week asking for $30 for rent money. I can't wait until he goes to middle school. Experience 10. We pulled a child who was allergic to eggs out of a lab in which eggshells were broken down by vinegar, and then the eggs were placed in hypotonic/hypertonic solutions to illustrate cell membrane action. The parent flipped a crap that his child missed 2 lab periods, although we'd prepared handouts, gone over the relevant info with the kid, and sent him along to the library so he wouldn't die of anaphylactic shock. Geez, we're trying to save your kid's life, here. 2 lab periods in the 7th grade won't make a big diff. Experience 11. Not a teacher but a witness to helicopter/stage momming. When I was in high school, the director of the musicals always cast her daughter as the lead in every play, even though she was awful. I challenged her on it when I was elected vice president of the club, which was a student vote she had no control over, and I was never cast in a show again. Flash forward to this girl getting accepted to college. The mom applies for a teaching job in the theater department of the school she's attending. I hate that woman to this day. Edit, I should also mention she ran a side business she called the Audition Club, wherein she scammed people into paying her for audition info and stuff. We live in the tri-state area near NYC. She'd basically go buy a Backstage magazine, listing source for acting jobs, and email it out to people and charge them for it. Anyone can spend $2.95 on a Backstage. Experience 12. Teacher at a private school in South Korea here. Every one of my students' parents is a CH-47 Chinook of a parent. So, the courses I teach are specifically geared for the students who want to study in the United States during college. I teach classes to prepare them for the SATs. I teach English conversation to help them be more fluent, although most of them were pretty good with English to begin with, and I teach in an American university style to help them get used to the format. The thing is, I essentially have no control over grades. In principle, I do because they are my classes, but the reality is totally different. Because it's a private school, every one of the parents pays money to get their kids in and pays a whole lot more for them to be part of this international program. This means that if their kid isn't doing well, they have a pretty good chance of packing them up and taking them to a competing school. So, because of this, every one of my students gets near perfect grades. Not because they earned them, but because my principal has flat out told me that they all have to pass and do well even if they only ever sleep in class, and about half of them do. Edit, it's nice to know I'm not alone in my frustrations with the education system here. Experience 13. I'm not a teacher, but I'm in high school and I directed some of the kids in my school's middle school division in a play of Treasure Island. One day, when we weren't allowed access to the theater, we rehearsed at the house of this girl, let's call her G. Her mother, let's call her M, invited us to come over, and at first, I was wary as something always seemed a bit off about her, like she was always in an insane rush to get her daughter home after all of our regular rehearsals. But they had a very large house, and I didn't want to give up the space, so I agreed to rehearse there. Once we were there, M politely greeted us, but G was holed up in her room. I asked if she could come and join us, but M kept insisting we start the rehearsal without her. I explained to her that G was one of the most important parts of the play, and it would be hard to practice without her, but M just kept saying that she had work to do and wasn't available. Finally, after about half an hour, G came out to meet us, but her crazy mother told us that she could only stay for 15 minutes and then she had to go back to her work. G then turned to her mother and said, "I don't have any work." To which M responded,
"Yes, you do, sweetie."
in the most passive-aggressive way I've ever heard someone talk to their child. I decided to stay out of it, and we started rehearsing with her. I then opened my laptop to show them a video of what they did, but M happened to be walking past at the time, and she ran over and slammed my laptop's lid down, shouting,
"No media!"
repeatedly, and then lifted it up and ran away with it somewhere. It was my computer, so I followed her and asked for it back, and she carefully explained that they were a no media family and that it's important that G isn't exposed to that. She then said that her daughter should get back to work anyway, but I said we needed 5 more minutes. When I got back to G, she said,
"Isn't my mom so annoying?"
And I wasn't sure how to respond, but G saw the uncertainty in my face and kept talking about her mother. It turned out that G wasn't allowed to watch TV, go on any computer, or even listen to music on an iPod, just did her schoolwork and read books that had already been read by her parents. She was in 6th grade, so of course she didn't have that much work to do, but her mother would make her study her notes from the day every day and would frequently make her do homework again as it wasn't long enough. G could have been getting straight A's with less than half of the work she had to do, so I told him that she shouldn't put so much pressure on her daughter, and she responded to that by kicking me out of the house. Her parents got divorced a year later and her father has full custody, and I couldn't be happier. Experience 14. My uncle was a teacher for 25 years at a fairly prestigious school and told me some fairly unbelievable horror stories. I'll just talk about the one that sticks out in my mind. He had taught several grades, and at this point, I believe he was teaching a 6th grade class. There was a boy in the class who was very, for lack of a better word, stupid. This isn't uncommon in schools, but this kid was simply thicker than brick and couldn't seem to grasp anything that was being taught to him. Catch-22 is he had a father who was the chief of police in town and a mother who worked closely with the mayor. Anyway, my uncle had been teaching a chapter in history and assigning homework for the day when the boy stood up and started yelling about how stupid history was and that my uncle was dumb for attempting to teach it to them. Needless to say, the boy was sent to the office for verbally abusing a teacher. This is where the story gets somewhat interesting. While the boy was in the office, he had begun crying and started to fabricate a story about how my uncle had called him an idiot outright in the classroom and that all he did was retort saying, "No, I'm not a jerk," or something to that effect. He then began requesting to speak to his parents. Of course, the headmaster obliged and let him call his parents and at the same time summoned my uncle to the office to discuss what was going on. 5 minutes later, as my uncle had just finished explaining what had happened, both the boy's parents burst into the office, guns blazing if you will, not literally. The husband attempted to arrest him with his wife basically spitting in my uncle's face as she was yelling at him. All the while their boy was sitting there smiling and apparently laughing as my uncle was taken from the room by the chief of police, all pretty absurd. As you can imagine, with a full room of witnesses and the children, the actual story came to light fairly quickly, but instead of apologizing and trying to save face, the husband began telling a tale of how my uncle had resisted arrest and reacted forcefully and struck him as he was attempting to gain control over him in the office. I found out later that both the parents approached the headmistress after the fact and offered her an ultimatum to agree with what they were saying, or they would make her life a living hell, all instead of simply admitting they were wrong. The husband lost his job, and the wife was severely demoted to desk clerk after everyone figured she tried to use her position as leverage in the situation. And as if this whole thing wasn't humorous enough, my uncle still swears to this day nailing the headmistress saved my life, definitely my career. What a lovely man he is. Experience 15. The lazy bum. As a teacher, you have a lot of students who have learning disabilities. Anywhere from 10% to 40% of my classes had some sort of special accommodation. There's a document for each kid in the special ed system. It's called different things depending on where you teach, but for our purposes, I'll call it a specialized education plan. It details whether a given student gets to take extra time on a test, or extra time to turn in assignments, or needs to have exam questions read to him/her, needs shorter assignments, etc. There are about 40 different ways we can accommodate kids with special needs, and each kid has a plan. So, I might have 6 class periods x 5 kids per class equals 30 different plans. I was one of the more involved educators at that school about the specialized education plans, SEPs. The special ed staff knew me well because I was frequently down on that end of campus, discussing with them how various students learn best, how I could best deal with certain disabilities and meet certain needs, etc. I had a good reputation in the special ed department as being one of the teachers who cared. I had a kid in my class who was failing hard, primarily due to failure to submit work. He, we'll call him Dave, had a specialized education plan, and I accommodated where I could, but it's tough to grant accommodations when Dave won't do any work at all. Sure, I can give him a shorter assignment, but he's not doing it. So, I had been in touch with his mom off and on via email. It was standard practice for me to contact parents via email and stay in touch. She was upset her son was failing. One of the special education instructors took me aside to do me a favor and give me some counsel.
Mr. Duradius, I hear Dave is failing your class.
Me.
Yes, Mrs. Jones, Dave is failing my class.
Her.
Why?
Me.
Ms. Jones, Dave is lazy and won't submit any assignments.
Her.
Have you been providing Dave with appropriate accommodations?
Me.
Of course.
Her.
Can you prove it? Because if this parent comes after you with a lawyer, your butt is going to be in a sling. It's not good when special ed kids fail.
The implication here is that my failing this kid was going to get me into trouble. When you've got as many different kids with accommodations as I had, it's tough to document providing accommodations to every single kid, even when you're doing your best to do so. The special ed teacher was trying to quietly leverage me into bumping Dave's grade up so she and I wouldn't have this headache to deal with. Me.
Mrs. Jones, I hear you loud and clear. Let me tell you something. I'm failing this kid because I feel that he lacks the understanding necessary to function as an adult in our society. I'm failing him because it would be a shame if he left this school without even a rudimentary understanding of what this state considers to be mandatory subject matter. Passing him would be the worst disservice I could do, because once he has that credit on his transcript, he can't come back and retake this course. So, I'll be sending him out in the world unprepared with no way to recover. This could affect him for life. And I'll do it in a heartbeat, Mrs. Jones. I don't have the money to handle a protracted legal battle, and I can't risk my livelihood over one child. So, you tell me when those lawyers are coming. And you tell me what grade you want on that kid's report card. Do you want a 65? Do you want a 75? Do you want an 85? Tell me a number, I'll write it down and I'll forge the numbers. I'll give this kid a 110 average in my class if it'll save my neck. I'll cut his throat, and I'll send him out into the world ignorant and incapable. Because my livelihood is more important to me than his future. What number would you like me to write on his report card?
She stood there with her mouth agape for a few seconds, then told me to have a good day. I walked out and started meticulously documenting everything having to do with this kid. I went through his accommodation sheet and made sure that each one was being met. I emailed proof to his mother, weekly, of what I was doing to meet his accommodations. I made copies of every accommodated assignment / every set of extra notes I made for him. Everything. I printed out every email I sent to the mother and highlighted it, color-coding the highlighting to certain accommodations. I volunteered to tutor the kid after school every day. And when he didn't show up for first one excuse or another, I printed out his mother's excuses and quietly collected them in his file as well. I had incontrovertible proof that I had done every single thing I could to meet this kid's needs, and every failure had to do with a lack of effort on his part or his mom's failure to bring him to tutoring. Another teacher who has the same student comes to my classroom, shaking in his boots. Mr. Duradius, I heard Dave's mother is going to mop the floor with us. She works for the special ed department at her school, and she knows all the ins and outs. She's going to come up here and put a blank special ed form in front of each of us and make us fill out Dave's accommodations from memory. I stayed after school late that night memorizing his documentation. By the end of that evening, I could check every box if necessary and write his student ID in the student ID spot. From memory. Within a couple of days, I was called to a meeting. I was ready for war. My position is that he's got his mother and the district wrapped around his finger. He's learned he can manipulate the system, so he doesn't have to do any work but passes anyway. Which is great, but he's not learning anything. My goal is for him to learn. Their goal is for him to pass. If this kid is allowed to get away with this now, he's hosed down the road when he gets to the real world. Your mom isn't going to set up a meeting with your boss about your accommodations. You're just going to get fired for being lazy and ignorant. I went to the meeting. Around the table were the mother, the student, a member of the special ed staff, the the district special ed director, the assistant principal, and the assistant superintendent. They asked his first teacher,
Mr. Smith, Dave is failing your class. What have you done to meet Dave's accommodations?
Mr. Smith stuttered and stammered.
Well, it's not that I'm not doing my job. He doesn't turn in any of his work, so,
Mr. Smith, do you have any proof of this?
Mr. Smith gets quiet. Next teacher, same thing. Next teacher, same thing. I'm sitting in the middle of the table with a stack of paperwork a foot high. Proof that this kid is lazy, isn't doing his work, isn't doing what he needs to do. All are color-coded, highlighted, and cross-referenced. Several emails per week with the mother times about 18 weeks or so about 60 or 70 emails. For any given question they might ask me, I can instantly produce pages of documentation detailing how and why this kid is failing. They ask the teacher on my left a bunch of questions. They ask the teacher on my right a bunch of questions. They never speak to me. In the end, I speak up.
I haven't been allowed to speak, but I'm going to weigh in here. Dave isn't failing because his needs aren't being met. He's failing because he's lazy. He's failing because he doesn't care. He's failing because he's figured out how to work the system. And if you have any questions about that, I have a record of every accommodation I've provided him going back for months. I have given him every tool for success, and he has chosen failure at every turn.
The district special ed director said,
Thank you, Mrs. DeRadius.
and the meeting adjourned. Dave's grade in the other teachers' classes mysteriously improved after that meeting. My guess is they had to bump his grade because they failed to meet his needs. No one ever spoke to me about Dave. A few days later, an office runner showed up at my classroom door with a transfer paper for Dave. I needed to sign it because Dave was being transferred out of my class. I went to the assistant principal, who had been in the meeting and knew of my frustration. Me.
If I don't sign this, what happens?
Assistant principal.
Dave gets moved anyway.
Me leaves the unsigned paper on her desk and returns to the classroom. Lesson learned: if you try to hold someone accountable for performance, they will simply go around you. The goal is to get kids out, not to get them educated.
We hope you enjoyed listening to today's stories. If you want to see more stories, check out these videos or check the links in the description for more videos. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. And ring that notification bell.